All right, so for this week's demo lab, you want to open these two files. So here's the syntax one, and here's the demo lab instruction one. And so you see it says to open the dataset, GSS 2022 dataset we've been using for demo labs, the code book, the syntax file, and then also the Excel file to make the graph, and that has the predicted value calculator. And you can go find it in Chapter 13, or also this is a link. So if you click that, it will also prompt you to download it. Okay, so once you have those, let's go ahead and continue. So we're going to use race as our independent construct and theism as our dependent variable. And so if you look at the code book, you can see that the race variable is a recoded one from a number of different race variables, but it's in 4 categories. So non-Hispanic white only, non-Hispanic black only, non-Hispanic other race or multiracial, and Hispanic. And so we can't use this as a regular independent independent variable, right? Because it's nominal level, it's categorical. So if you think about like going back to scatter plots and that best fit line, right? These aren't ordered. So we can't use it like that. And so today's lab's focused on what we can do in order to still use race or any other nominal level variable. So this says, and then theism, if you remember, is just, right, the extent to which you believe in God or not, which is ordinal and ratio-like. So first it says to write a research question between them. So I'm just going to say, is there a relationship between race and people's belief and the extent to which people believe in God? And why don't I say among US adults in 2022? Okay, so race has 4 categories again. And in order to use it, we're going to have to make it into a reference group set. And so we have to designate one of these as the reference group. Now, there's not like a wrong answer to this. I probably wouldn't use non-Hispanic other multiracial as the reference group because that just has a lot of different racial identities and groups kind of collapse into one. And so it's not that meaningful of a construct. A lot of times people will use the one that has like the highest frequency, like the modal one, or and so like non-Hispanic white would be one that you could use. But also maybe you have a particular interest or you're doing a particular study, and so you want to compare to non-Hispanic black or to Hispanic or something like that. So whatever you choose the reference group as, basically what's going to happen is when you do the regression, you're going to be comparing everything to that group. So like if you chose Hispanic, then you're going to find out like, okay, how does the theism of non-Hispanic whites compare to Hispanics? How does theism of non-Hispanic blacks compare to Hispanics? How does the theism of non-Hispanic other or multiracial compare to Hispanics? Right, so you can choose whichever one you want to kind of do that comparison to. I'm just going to choose non-Hispanic white only, and so we'll see how groups compare to non-Hispanic whites, and we'll also have predictions for each of the categories. Okay, so now I need to run a linear regression. So this is similar to last week, except I'm going to have to use multiple independent variables. So for race, there are 4 variables so if you go back to chapter 2, it talks about how to recode, but I already have indicator variables for each of these, and we can use those for the reference group set. So there's 4 of them, right? You can see there's like race, well, I have them listed here. Race Hispanic indicator, race non-Hispanic black indicator, race non-Hispanic other indicator, and race NH white indicator. So that's these 4 right here, where you can see for each from 0 is like they're not that category, and 1 is they are, right? So for example, for this one, if it's a 0, it means they're anything other than non-Hispanic black only. So they could be Hispanic, non-Hispanic white only, or non-Hispanic other multiracial. So everyone in this is only in one of these categories, And so there's an indicator for each of these where 1 equals yes, they're in this category, and 0 equals no, they're not. So for our linear regression, we have to exclude our reference group category. We're not going to use an indicator variable for that because, so for example, for ours, if we use these three, if they are a 0 for each of these variables, since everybody's one of these things, if they're not in this and not in this and not in this, then that means they are this category. And so it's redundant to also include it. If you end up including all 4 categories, or for any nominal level variable, if you have a indicator set and you include all of the indicators, including your reference group category, SPSS will actually remove one for you because it's just redundant information that it's feeding into the system. But if you want to choose your reference group, which we do, then you're going to omit it yourself. Okay, so we're going to use these 4, except this is our reference group, and so we're not going to use that one. Again, it's still going to show up because if somebody is not in any of these 3 categories, then that means that they're non-Hispanic white. Okay, so first I'll show you how to do this with syntax. So again, if you need to, you can make sure syntax commands show up in the log. We're going to turn on weighting. The name of the variable here is weight variable for this data set for weighting. And then for the regression, we're going to put theism as our dependent variable. And then the only difference here is before you put in one independent variable, and here we're going to put in more than one, which is with a space in between and a period at the very end. We only have 3, so I don't need IV4 name. I could add, if I had one and I had more categories, I could add, another, etc. The only thing is that if you erase to get to the 3, just make sure that you either don't erase that period or you put it back in, because the command going from here to here has to end with a period. Okay, so I'm going to put in the names of these variables. So there's the race Hispanic indicator, race non-Hispanic Black indicator, and race other indicator, non-Hispanic other indicator. Okay, so again, I'm not using the nominal race variable, and I'm not using my reference group. I'm just using the indicators for the categories that are not my reference group. Okay. And I click play. And so you can see that I end up, like, here's my syntax, and then I end up with the regression. Now, if you wanted to do that with drop-down menus, then first, if I want to make sure, I can go edit options. If I want to make sure that the commands are on viewer, display commands in the log, and OK. So I want to turn weighting on. I go data, weight cases, find my weight variable, put it in, click OK. And then for my regression, same as last week, regression linear. Put in my dependent variable, turn on confidence intervals, descriptives, click continue. And then the only difference here is instead of putting one variable into here, I'm going to put all 3. So there's, again, I'm not using race. That's the nominal level one. I'm not using the white one, which is my reference group. I'm using these 3. And I'm just going to put them all into this box. So you can just use the arrow. You can drag them over. Oops. You can do it one at a time. You can do it more than one at a time. But we have them all in at the same time. Okay, so we're not using this next button or anything else. We're just putting them all in this box and clicking OK. Oops. Okay, so let me copy my syntax. And then I want to put in descriptives, model summary, ANOVA, and coefficients. So let's put those in here. So here's my descriptives. And for this, because these are indicators, we can also see that like 5% of the respondents then were Hispanic only, 11% non-Hispanic Black only, 12% non-Hispanic other or multi only. So that's what the means mean here. And then again, this is the average for everyone that we have both theism and racial data for, valid data for on the theism coding from 1 to 6. Okay, so the descriptive. So now I need model summary, ANOVA, and coefficients. Let's do the last three. Okay. I'm going to turn off weighting and run the same one again. And I want to get descriptive statistics. And again, this is for the sample size. So again, there's two ways to do that. First, if I'm using syntax, I'm just going to run this weight off. That turns weighting off. And then I'm going to run the same regression. So I could type it out, but I can also just go up here. And as long as I don't have weight on highlight, like as long as I don't re-click this or have the whole thing, if I'm just anywhere in this area, I can just click play again, and that'll run it. The other thing I could do is go data, weight cases, and click do not weight cases, and click OK. And then I could go back, analyze, regression, linear, everything's still set up, and just click OK. So now from my output, I'm just going to take this descriptives. And I'm also going to take my syntax. Okay, so now it says to complete a summary table. So we're going to take this information and put it into something more visually pleasing and that kind of just takes the information we need and displays it in the type of way that you would share, you know, if you were doing a poster presentation, if you were putting it in a journal article, etc. So there's a few templates here, which is just so you don't have to mess with them. And so these depend on how many groups you're showing. So again, we have 4 groups. It looks like 3 variables here, but remember that we have our reference group too. So going back to race was a 4 category variable that we're making into the reference group set. And so we have 4 different racial groups. And so we want the one that has 4 groups with 3 indicator variables. So I'm just going to get rid of the other ones. So I don't need the one for 5 groups. I don't need the one for 3 groups. Okay. And so now this is, let's see, just table 1. It's my first table here. Predicting theism. It's GSS 22. My independent variable, right? The construct is race. This is for overall. And so now we're going to fill these in. Let me just bring up here. So the one we just ran with weighting off, we're using this sample size right here. That's 2,310 cases. Then if we go back up here, so this is asking us about the overall significance of whether collectively these variables improve our predictions of theism over not knowing them. And so this is asking whether there's a relationship between race and theism. And so for that, we're going to this ANOVA, and we're looking at the p-value right here. And this one, p was less than 0.001, which means that we're going to put 3 asterisks. Here's r squared, so 0.035. Again, I either multiply that by 100 or I move the decimal over twice, and so this is 3.5%. And then the rest of it is all this coefficients box. So let's see if I can, yep, there we go. So my intercept, again, was non-Hispanic white only. So I'm going to list that so I know what it is here. And that's going to be this constant row. Okay, so for my coefficients values, I'm using this column, the unstandardized coefficients B for all of them. And then for my lower and upper bound, I'm using these. And then for the question marks, I'm using the p-values and looking at this as kind of the legend or key to figure out what to put. Okay. So for my first one, my coefficient value is 4.545. P is less than 0.001. My lower bound is 4.467. My upper bound is 4.624. Okay, and if the next one is Hispanic only, so I'm going to put that name in here. And that one is 0.767 for my slope. My p-value is less than 0.001, so that's 3 asterisks. And my lower bound is 0.469. And my upper bound is 1.06. Probably going to come back and change these to go to just the hundredths column and round them, but I'm just keeping them a little bit further out for now just because I want to use that when we graph, and I don't want to go back and grab the numbers here. Okay, next I have non-Hispanic Black only. So this one, you can see the coefficient value is 0.871. P is less than 0.001, so I have 3 asterisks. And then I'm going to put in my lower and upper bounds. And then finally, I have the non-Hispanic other or multi only. That's negative 0.029, negative 0.241, and 0.183. And then here my p-value is 0.791, and so that's more than 0.1. And so that isn't going to get any marking, so I'm just erasing that question mark. It doesn't get any marks. Voila, there is the table. Okay, so we don't need to look at any of these anymore. We have all the info we need right here for the rest of this. So it says, what is the value of r squared? And we can see it's 3.5%. Explain what it means in context. So this is saying that, right, like the independent variable explains r squared percent of the variance in the dependent variable. So we're saying that, right, among our respondents of the US adults in 2022, race, like as categorized into these 4 categories, explains 3.5% of the variance in theistic beliefs. So there's a lot of variation in terms of the extent to which people do or don't believe in God. And we can account for 3.5% of that variation based on race. Okay, our linear equation. So before we had y equals a plus bx, right? When we had one independent variable, right? That would be like this. And now we have 3 variables. And so we're just going to add the x again until we have 3 of them for 1, 2, 3 of them. What I like to do, and there's different ways to kind of notate this, but is just to use a different letter to make sure I know which category is which. So I'm going to use H for Hispanic. I'm going to use B for Black, and I'm going to use O for other and multi. Okay, so Y stays itself. That's our dependent variable outcome. A is our y-intercept, our constant. That's the 4.545. B for Hispanic, so that's the slope for Hispanic, so that's the 0.767. Black is going to be the 0.871. So we're just putting our coefficients in for each. And this one's going to be negative 0.029. I'm going to just put these in parentheses to make it easier to kind of see and differentiate. Okay, so there's the equation. So now we're going to graph it. Well, now I have it right in here. Why don't I just go back and I will round these. Okay. So when you pull up the spreadsheet, you'll see that there's, again, different tabs at the bottom, and we want to go to the categorical ones. And you can see there's one for 3 categories, 4 categories, or 5 categories. Remember, our race one had 4 categories, so we're going to use that one. So the first thing it says to do is replace these with our intercept and our slopes, right? And so this was, you don't have to change, you only have to change the yellow things, but I'm just putting this in. So it was H-O. So our intercept was 4.545. 0.7767, 0.871, negative 0.029. So I just got those from here. I mean, I could also get them. These are literally these numbers, or again, these numbers right here. And then now we have to label these groups. So the reference group again was non-Hispanic white only. Right, our first one, so this was maybe I could put these. Or I could label, it doesn't really matter what I do here as long as I have them lined up right. So if I put the wrong thing here, then it won't match, but I need to make sure I match the intercept and slope coefficients that I put here with the categories here. So anyway, this one was the Hispanic only, non-Hispanic black only, and non-Hispanic other multi only. No, well, okay. So here's my graph. I'm going to change this to name the construct race. I'm going to change this to name the construct theism. And then I don't need to change the x-axis, right? You can see these are categories, but my y-axis for theism, remember it goes from 1 through 6. So I'm going to change that. And that's fine. And these are all rounding to the nearest one. I'm going to add some decimal places here so I can just see the differences for those predictions. Okay, so here is my graph. So I'm going to do 2 things with that. First, I'm going to just center this a little bit more. I'm going to screenshot of the graph. Put it in here. And then I'm going to show my work by taking a screenshot of the changes I made to the yellow sections. Here. Okay, so now I want to make predictions for each of these. I actually have those predictions here, but for each of my categories. And again, I want to make sure I do all 4 categories. So when I'm looking at my equation, I see these 3 variables, or if I'm looking here, I see 3 variables with slopes, right? But I don't want to ignore my reference group also. So a couple ways to do this. First would be you can use this equation. And basically, again, because it's going to be where a respondent only fits into one of these categories, or either this, or none of them. So they're either going to be a 1 for this, a 1 for this, a 1 for this, or a 0 for all of them. Let's see, did I already list? I don't really want to copy that one. Okay, so let's list the 4 categories first. Should we do it? So there's non-Hispanic, white only, Hispanic only, black only, and others. So for example, with this, I could, if they're white only, non-Hispanic white only, then that means they are not Hispanic. That would be a 0, because the coding for all of these, we could go back and look at the code book if you wanted, but it's 0 and 1, right? So like, if they're not Hispanic, it's a 0, and if they are Hispanic, it's a 1. So black, non-Hispanic black would be a 0, and other race would be a 0. And so you're left with the actual, so that would be 0 plus 0 plus 0. And so you're left with the y-intercept. So when I'm making a prediction for white only, this is what it is. We'll put it in real life context at the end. Let me just do my calculations first. For Hispanic only, they are Hispanic, so that's a 1. And if they're non-Hispanic, if they are Hispanic only, then they're not non-Hispanic black, and they're not non-Hispanic other multiracial. And so we end up with that. Well, rounding here, but so we can add those. And then I could do the same for the others. So like here, the Hispanic is going to be a 0 and black's going to be a 1. And here it's going to be a 0 and this is a 1. So this is the equation of writing the whole thing out. Because this is just one construct where they're only one or the other, basically this is your prediction for the reference group. And then for any of the others, you're taking the reference group prediction and you're adding whatever it is. So if they're Hispanic, it's this plus this, black, this plus this, other multi, this plus this, which ends up being right this minus that. The other thing you can do to solve these is going back to here. At the very end, there's these predicted value calculators. So this is if you had one independent variable, but there's one for multiple independent variables. And so for this, I can put in these values. Oops. So 4.545 for the intercept. Right, this is, I'm just going to label these so I know. And so if I want to make a prediction for, let's say, Hispanic, then they would be a 1 for this, a 0 for this, and a 0 for that. If I wanted to do it for like black, I mean, I can do it again over here. Like, and so it'd be a 0 for Hispanic, 1 and 0. If I wanted to do it for other multi, 0, 0, and 1. If I wanted to do it for white, then they would all be 0, right? And that's going to just give me these calculations right here. Okay. So now we need to put these in real life context. So we're going to go to our code book for theism. And we're just look at what these mean. So for non-Hispanic white only respondents, or even, I mean, this is what we would use, even though it's respondents, it would be our best prediction for the target population as well. So US adult, well, sorry, among US adults in 2022, we would non-Hispanic white only would be predicted. Yeah, I'm just gonna write the prediction to be at 4.545, so about halfway between 4 and 5. So this is sometimes believing in God and believing with doubts. So let's say yeah, just so between sometimes and with doubts, most of the time with minor doubts, let's just say. Or actually, sorry, they have with doubts, so it's more than doubts. Okay, so I'll just phrase it that way. Non-Hispanic white only U.S. adults would be predicted to, sorry, and maybe people don't know what that means. I can figure it out. To believe in God most of the time, though with doubts. Next one, 5.312 is kind of a third of the way from here to there. So between the doubts and no doubts. So um, they have they have doubts, but they're a little less minor. And they're like minor doubts, but they're not like so small that they're closer to six. They're closer to five than six. So for this one, I'm gonna say that Hispanic U.S. adults would be predicted to believe in God, um, though with um, though hmm, some doubts. Hmm, well, I have doubts. I sometimes have doubts. I very much have doubts. Um, Substantial doubts. Uh, let's say though often with doubts. I think that would work. Okay. And the last one is sorry, that was oops, I wrote wrong place there. Oh, yeah. Though often with doubts. Okay, and then the next one, 5.416. That's almost the same as this. I'm not going to distinguish the 0.1 difference. It's still less than halfway between 5 and 6. Um, it's going to say non-Hispanic, Black only U.S. adults would be predicted to believe in God, though often with doubts. And this one, 4.516, is very close to this one, halfway between 4 and 5. And so I'm going to say non-Hispanic U.S. adults who are multi-racial or a race other than non-Hispanic, white only, Hispanic only, or oh sorry, was it Hispanic only? Yeah, because if they were Hispanic and something else, they were in the no. It's just Hispanic. It's not Hispanic only. Let me make sure did I say that anywhere else? Yes. All right, it was just that one place. Oop, number two right here. Oh, this will work. Yep. Okay. So, non-Hispanic U.S. adults who are multiracial or race other than, well, we don't have to say non-Hispanic because we already said non-Hispanic right here, other than white only or black only would be predicted to believe in God most of the time, though with doubts. Okay. So, what is our y-intercept value? So that again is the one that we put in right here for the intercept, right? Or if we go back up here, that's this one right here. Why don't I just copy this table so we can look at it as we do these things? Actually, I'll put it right here. Okay, so our y-intercept is 4.55. And what does that mean? So this is our prediction for when the rest of the independent variables are zero. So it's the prediction for our reference group. So that's going to be the same as this one. Which categories are significantly different from our reference group and which are not? So we're looking at these p-values, right? And we already marked them. And the ones that have at least one asterisk are significant, right? If it has a tilde, then that means it's kind of marginally significant. So it depends on your kind of criteria for what you're calling significant or not. And then if it doesn't have any marking, it's not. So let's see which are. So Hispanic is significantly different from non-Hispanic white only. Non-Hispanic black only is significantly different. And then non-Hispanic other / multi is not significantly different. And so again, I'm using these. I could also go back and look at the actual right output and look at these right here. And then I need to justify it. So I could go back and look at specific p-values for this. I'm just using the asterisk, I guess, for the one. I will go back for this one. It was 0.791. Okay, so I said which are significantly different, and I justified it. And so what does it mean? This means, right, like that I'm over 95% confident that among all US adults in 2022, right, the average theism of Hispanic adults would be different than the average theism of non-Hispanic white adults. For this, it means that I'm not over 95% confident, right, that among all US adults, my target population, this group is different in their average theism from this group. Okay, now we're going to look at our slopes. So that's going to be these coefficients. Okay. I could also, again, if I'm looking at this table, these three are slopes. And so then we have to put this into real life context. And so this is comparing this group to our reference group, right? So it's how much more they are than the reference in terms of their predicted value for our dependent variable for theism in this case. So this is going to basically be the same as what we did with our chapter 12 indicator variables in terms of how we're expressing this. So let's start. So for Hispanic, we're going to say, right, Hispanic US adults or respondents, it doesn't really matter. Respondents is what these slopes are based on. Remember, we have those confidence intervals, but it's also our best prediction for the target population. But Hispanic US adults average theism is predicted to be 0.77 units higher than our reference group. So that's non-Hispanic white only US adults average theism. And again, these units are a little difficult. Like if you said this to somebody, they would have no clue what that meant. And so what we should just share, right? Theism goes from 1 um, atheism to 6, believing in God without doubts. So that gives you just kind of a sense of the scale. Okay, same thing here. So is non-Hispanic Black only U.S. adults average theism is predicted to be 0.87 units higher than non-Hispanic white only U.S. adults average theism. And finally, this one, non-Hispanic U.S. adults who are multiracial or a race other than white or Black, right? Or Hispanic, but we have non-Hispanic here. Average theism is predicted to be, so it is again negative 0.03 units higher, but we wouldn't say that. So instead, we'd say 0.03 units lower. Okay, and these are all again in reference to the reference group. So these slopes are again saying, here's how it compares to this group. Okay, so is there a significant relationship between your reference group set and your dependent variable? So that's where I'm looking again at this one. I'm looking at the overall construct in that p-value. And so yes, right, p is less than 0.001, which is less than 0.05. And what does that mean? So now instead of talking about whether there's a significant relationship or difference there between like here between a specific category in our reference group, we're saying overall is there a significant relationship between race and theism? And so we can say yes, right? Well, I already said yes. So I am over 99.9% confident. This p is less than 0.001, which would be 100% minus 0.1%. Right, I'm over 95% confident, but I'm over 99.9% confident here that there is a relationship between race and theism among US adults in 2022. Is it substantive? So it is significant. So that means that we're confident the relationship exists. And then we're going to look at R squared is 3.5%, which is kind of low. It's not nothing, but it's not that much variance. So which has a bit of explained variance, or means race is a little bit of variance in theism, but not that much. And then if we look at our slopes, the biggest difference, well, from our reference group to another would be here, right? Like is 0.87 different. Actually, the biggest difference is between these two groups because look from the reference one, this one goes lower and this one goes higher. And so these two are 0.9 apart. It could also be useful here just to look at the graph and look at the predicted values and whether they seem different. And so, yeah, 5.4 and 5.4 is almost it's 0.9 more than this, and it's more than 0.8 more than that. And so that's like it's in a different kind of bracket area. And so I would say that that seems substantive to me. I didn't ask you to do this, but I could also look at these and see like, well, how different could it be? But we see like this one is at least half a point. This one's at least almost like 2/3. Yeah. So this one was not significantly different than white, right? And so it could be the same as this, but I would say that it is substantive in terms of the slope. So where was that? Okay. So let me go back to this, I think. Um, so non-Hispanic Black only and Hispanic only respondents are on average about from like zero point 0.8 to zero point 0.9, yeah, 0.8 or more units higher than non-Hispanic white only and non-Hispanic other multi on a 1 to 6 scale. That's substantive. So again, like zero point 0.8 would be kind of like 16% of the scale of kind of going across this, right? So if we had something from 0 to 100, it would be 16 points. Here it's only going, right, like zero point 0.8 points, but it's only a scale of 1 to 6. And so that kind of puts you into a different area, or it seems qualitatively different to me. So do I think it's substantive? You could go either way here. You could say, like there are these differences, but I really feel like with the R squared that it's not enough. But I'd say, given that it's substantive and it explains some of that variation, I'm going to say, yes, it is substantive, right? It could be more substantive, right? There's always things that are, it could have a higher R squared, it could have bigger slopes, or predicted values be further apart, but it's telling us something, and it's showing differences, and it's explaining some of that variance. And it's explaining over 1/30th of the variance, right? Okay. So is there a causal relationship? So significance equals yes, substantiveness equals yes, causal order. It has the correct causal order, right? Race could impact your theism, but your theism won't change your race, right? So the race comes first. It's theory. Okay, so why might it be that we're seeing that Black and Hispanic US adults have higher rates of theism? So we can think about for Hispanic adults, um, maybe more theistic because they are more likely to be religious, as um, Latin America has a strong Catholic and religious mm, environment. Not the best word, that's fine. Um, and Black US adults um, during segregation, especially turned to Black churches and later and Black mosques um, for mm, community and spirituality. Um, these backgrounds could be what contributed to Hispanic and Black just adults being more theistic than their white and multiracial and other race counterparts. Um, okay. And then is it non-spurious? So theory is like, yes, we could think of a theory. Here is a theory. So if I'm thinking about this theory, though, I'm saying that it's not necessarily that they that I'm saying that different races are um, different racial groups have differences in how much they're potentially attached to religious institutions and how religious they are. And then people who are more religious are more likely to be more theistic, although there's some variation depending on what religion you look at. But that's explaining the mechanism. It's not that the like amount of religion comes before race, right? So race is still like one of those demographic variables that often things aren't going to proceed. And so I'm going to say I can't think of a preceding variable that would explain away the relationship. So given that I have all of these as yes, I'm going to say yes, there is a causal relationship. Black and Hispanic U.S. adults are more likely to be affiliated with religious institutions and have those institutions be an important part of their culture. I mean, there's certainly swaths of like white US adults where that's also true, and there's certainly particular communities in certain areas like what is it, the Reformed Dutch in Iowa or like other communities that like would have that too, but that doesn't it's not as widespread among whites as these other groups, which in turn increases their theism. White, non-Hispanic white, and other multi-racial other adults are comparatively less affiliated with religious institutions, less affiliated with and less connected. Right. So they still can be, but just because we can see everyone's again between a 4 and a 6, but um okay. So that is that. Let me show you one other example. So if we just were to do this with, let's just keep the race one, but let's do hours worked last week. And so what we see here, I want to turn my weighting back on too first for that. So for this, we can see that overall it's not significant. So we're not over 95% confident there's a relationship between race and how many hours US adults worked on average last week. We can see that in our sample, race is explaining 0.2% of variance in hours worked last week. And you can see none of these are significantly different than our reference group than non-Hispanic whites. In our sample, non-Hispanic whites are working an average of 40.4 hours a week. Hispanic US adults are working on average about 2 hours less, so about 38 hours compared to whites, right? So 2 hours less than non-Hispanic whites, which puts them at a predicted value of around 38. Non-Hispanic Black only US adults in the sample, the respondents are predicted to be working about 0.8 more hours on average last week than non-Hispanic whites, which puts them at about 41 hours a week on average. And then non-Hispanic other or multiracial are predicted to be about 1.3 hours more a week of work in terms of what they did last week compared to non-Hispanic white. So they would be at a predicted value around 41.7 hours. However, we can see that all of these confidence intervals overlap 0. So we're not over 90%. So in the sample, we can see that there's variation, right? This is like 2 hours different even. And this one is higher. So even like Hispanic compared to other multiracial would be like over 3 hours different. But we're not 95% confident that any of these are different from this group. Right. And if we go to when I still had weighting off, we can look at the sample sizes here. Well, okay, overall, there's this many. But if I were to, let's see, well, we can see what percent of it, so of them, but why don't I just run a frequency table? Let's turn weighting back off. Across the this one here. Okay, so we can see that there's not as many folks in these categories. I mean, it's still a fair amount here, but like for this group, it's only 157. And so if we had a bigger sample of these racial minorities, or if we had oversampled, we might get to significance for some of this. But based on the data we have, and based on the level of the difference with kind of the variation within each of these, then we're saying that we can't be confident that they're necessarily different or that race is having variation among all US adults, right? We can't make that claim. I guess we could still graph the sample. So for that, here we go. For this, it's the same number of categories. So it was 4 categories. Yep, I already have that set up. And so the only things I need to change, I already have my labels here, are these. Okay, so it was 40.32. And then I just need to change this to hours worked last week. And this goes, it's going to have to go up to at least 41.6 or so 42. So why don't I change this to start from 0 hours to 45 hours. So I could do it that way, and that looks fine to me. I could also, if I want to zoom on these differences, I could also say, you know what, let's do from 35 to 45. And I could see more clearly differences, but also then this exaggerates the differences, or at least me to believe they're more different than they are. Because these look like they're, more than under 2 hours apart. Versus, right, if I did something like that, right, they all kind of look the same. So it's up to you kind of what scale you use in terms of that.